Commerce, Science, and Transportation will come to order. I thank all my colleagues for being here, and I especially want to thank all of our staffs for their hard work on getting us to this point this morning. I want to thank Ranking Member Cruz for his hard work on this legislation and for much discussion over the last several months on how to continue to make aviation a big priority for us as a nation. I also want to thank the subcommittee chairs, Duckworth and Ranking Member Moran, for working together in helping to develop this bipartisan legislation. We've processed more than 200 amendments, and we were able to get agreement on almost 80 amendments, the majority of which were bipartisan. Our Senate bill addresses many of the pressing needs of our aviation system. We put more FAA safety inspectors on the factory floor, more air traffic controllers in the towers, and we strengthen FAA oversight of foreign repair stations. We establish mandatory refunds for flight disruptions and prohibit airlines from charging extra fees for families just to sit together. And we're investing in airport infrastructure and ensuring reliable air service to rural communities throughout the country. With Senator Lujan's leadership, we also are reauthorizing the NTSB and making sure that it has the resources it needs to do investigations. For America to be the world leader in aviation, we must set the gold standard, and we have for the most part. But recent events that we have seen put a dent in those safety issues, and we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to reach the highest standards. We can't take this for granted. Serving on this committee, we have had a huge responsibility, including working with Senator Wicker on the aviation certification bill 2 years ago. Much of that we need to continue to focus on the FAA for its implementation. After we get the FAA reauthorization, I know that our committee will be holding many hearings about the recent Alaska incident and hearing from the FAA, from NTSB, from manufacturers, from safety experts, and reviewing what else we need to do to make sure that these are at the highest standards. Our bill requires the FAA in immediate sense to address issues, finalizing a 25-hour cockpit voice recorder rule. We heard just recently in the aftermath of the Alaska accident that we only had a 2-hour recording that had disappeared. We want the NTSB investigators to have all the data that they need. Our bill invests in airport service detection equipment and technology that helps prevent runway close calls and near misses. My colleague, Senator Cruz, came with a video even on a near miss in one of the airports in his state. So getting this implemented and as soon as possible is very critical for our safety improvements. I want to thank Senator Schatz for his helicopter tour safety bill and Senator Baldwin, Capito, and Welch for their Global Aircraft Maintenance Safety Improvement Act. I also want to thank Senator Klobuchar for her leadership on the Air Grants Program and training and skilling a workforce. This will be the first time Congress, though, is setting a refund standard for refundable tickets. You will be able to get a refund after a 3-hour domestic delay and for a flight that's international after 6 hours of delay. So I want to thank Senators Markey and Vance for working on this, including the provision that says that families can sit together, and very much appreciate his leadership on that. We have a new Senate-confirmed DOT Assistant Secretary at the Department of Transportation to look at consumer issues, and we are increasing the fines to $75,000 per violation as a strong deterrent. I want to thank the subcommittee chair, Senator Duckworth, for her incredible work on championing those with disabilities and making sure that the airport experience for them is addressed in this legislation. Our bill also tries to address aviation growth for the future, a critical aspect of not just new technology, but the Airport Improvement Program. And I want to thank Senators Hickenlooper, Rosen, Moran, Thune, Young, and Wicker for their efforts on advanced drones and the legislation here to look at how we move forward. There is also a fund to innovate new research such as generation aircraft and sustainable aviation fuels. Thanks to Senators Tester, Fisher, Sullivan for their hard work on essential air service programs. And our bill ensures robust service connectivity between small and rural communities on EAS and helps communities thrive. As I've said before many times in this committee, 80% of economic development happens within 10 miles of an airport. So if we're not continuing to invest in our airports, then we're not giving communities around the United States of America the ability to continue to grow out our strong economy that we want to continue on after the CHIPS and Science effort, which was very much about having more innovation in many, many different places of the United States. We also expand the pipeline of airline industry workers. About 5% of airline pilots and women and less than 15% of pilots and engineers are women and minorities. The Aviation Workforce Development Grant, as I mentioned by Senators Klobuchar, Duckworth, Warnock, Moran, Thune, and Peters, will help us try to target a population and get more people into this growing sector of the U.S. economy. And as I mentioned early, it is expanding our air traffic controller workforce and addressing the needs of a growing air traffic system. So again, thanks to all my colleagues, thanks to my staff for their hard work on this. I want to especially thank Melissa Porter, who has now been through the COVID aviation development plan, the infrastructure plan, the AXA bill, and now an FAA bill. So I think it's just been a lot of work. So thanks to everybody. And I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it's been a long road with some delays and a little bit of turbulence, but I'm glad we've reached a compromise and are marking up this bipartisan bill. In recognition that it's taken quite a while to get here, I will keep my comments brief so we can move this bill out of committee. The core mission of the FAA is to ensure the safety of the flying public. From jets and commercial service, to general aviation aircraft for private use, to the new and emerging entrants like drones and air taxis and commercial space. The FAA's mission is as expansive as it is critical. Since we began working on this bill early last year, the challenges facing the aviation industry and the traveling public have been acutely clear. A strained air travel system that needs a modern air traffic system, an FAA workforce that must have the technical expertise to conduct effective oversight of manufacturers and airlines, as well as technical experts who can help in the certification of new and novel technologies. The FAA Reauthorization Bill eliminates the FAA's office tasked with implementing NextGen, a cost overrun modernization program of our air traffic system that has served as a tech refresh instead of a true modernization. And instead, it requires the FAA to actually develop an achievable plan to modernize our system. In the last year, we've experienced a NOTAM breakdown, causing a full ground stop. We've experienced multiple near misses, including a near catastrophic near miss in Austin, controller shortages, mandated flight reductions in the New York area, and of course, the plug door failure on Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 last month. Each of these events highlights the importance of enacting smart reforms and bringing certainty to the FAA as the agency confronts serious challenges. I want to highlight just a few of the ways this bipartisan bill will help ensure that the FAA can improve at its core mission of keeping the flying public safe. A key element in our bill is requiring the collection of data to help the FAA identify concerning safety trends and provide transparency and accountability to the flying public when a flight reports a service difficulty to the agency. While it's easy to throw more staff at safety concerns, it won't help safety if the FAA isn't making sure it's hiring the staff with the technical expertise needed by the agency. This bill also includes valuable bipartisan contributions from many members of this committee on both sides of the dais, ranging from addressing the air traffic controller and aviation technician shortages to expanding the length of the recording time for cockpit voice recorders to 25 hours. We saw how vital it is to extend the cockpit voice recorder length when the recording in the Alaska Airlines accident was overridden, which is shocking and indefensible, and this bill will fix that. The provisions around advanced air mobility and drones can help revolutionize supply chain logistics and transportation. By safely bringing these promising technologies online, we can improve productivity growth and spur economic activity. As with any bill of this nature, there are provisions where additional work is still needed. I know there are concerns that some of the consumer-focused provisions, while well-intentioned, may have the opposite effect if not implemented carefully and systematically. We should give these provisions due consideration. Similarly, we need to address the work of the Office of Commercial Space Transportation at the FAA, which is critical for our nation's burgeoning commercial space industry. I look forward to working on that part of the commercial space bill, which we are also writing together. With the aviation industry facing serious challenges, this legislation charts a course to address many of them while also modernizing and transforming the FAA's operations. I want to thank my Republican and my Democrat colleagues alike for their hard work on this bill. And I want to, in particular, thank the staff, including Lila Helms and Melissa Porter on the chair's staff, who worked very, very hard on this bill, and also Simone Perez and Andrew Miller and Brad Grants on my team, who worked tirelessly as well. And I want to thank our committee clerks, Jeff Johnson and Stephanie Gamache, who graciously bore with us throughout this process. Today's action moves us much closer to a final FAA reauthorization that makes the nation aviation system safer and more reliable. As we continue to move the bill forward, we are committed to honoring the longstanding tradition that this vital legislation receives broad bipartisan support, and I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues in that effort.
I'd like to now call on Senator Duckworth and Senator Moran, the ranking member and chairs of the subcommittee. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to add anything to the comments. I just want to say thank you for this process. Thank you for the staff. I'm going to keep my remarks just to that because I want us to get going. Thank you.
Senator Moran.
I always hate to follow Senator Duckworth, but particularly today when she was so brief. And I have a few things to say, but the precedent seems to be set, so I'll speed up what I intended to say. But I really am glad we're here on this day to get this completed. I remember when I became the ranking member of this subcommittee, I tried to warn my colleagues. We've been through the days in which extensions were time and time again, creating great levels of uncertainty. And we are in the process of making certain that that doesn't continue this time as we're reauthorizing this in a long-term fashion. Our air system, our aviation system, is operating under significant strain and stress. This is a strong step forward toward trying to solve the challenges that we face and in promoting, increasing the safety of the flying public. I, again, appreciate the chance that we've had to do this in a bipartisan manner, and I thank you, Chairman Cantwell, and you, Ranking Member Cruz, for the way in which you have included Senator Duckworth and I in the day-to-day and week-to-week efforts to get this accomplished. I'd prioritize a 5-year reauthorization, aviation workforce improvements and supply chain challenges to address, modernizing the FAA, and these provisions are included in this base text. And I'm also pleased that we're strengthening essential air service, hugely important to lots of rural communities, to lots of members in this committee, enhancing the federal contract tower program, again, often a rural issue, but are increasing the support for FAA Centers of Excellence for advanced materials, and create an air traffic controller training program to allow contractors to train and control themselves, a helpful tool to alleviate shortage. Those are priorities of mine, and I'm glad to see that they're here, and I'm pleased to be part of this ever-evolving safety process of making sure that those who fly and those who fly on planes and those who manufacture the planes do all the things necessary for a viable and strong aviation system for our country. Important to our nation, important to our citizens, and I thank you all again.
Okay, I turn to the Ranking Member Cruz for a motion. Unless anybody else has an opening comment, but we have members who want to offer and withdraw and lots of statements, but I think if we get, since we have such a great group of people here for quorum, that we move and continue that if it's non-essential to later. But I will, if somebody's has an urgent statement, no? Okay, go ahead. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a very, very simple motion. I move that S1939, FAA Reauthorization Act of 2023, as amended by the Cantwell, Cruz, Duckworth, Moran substitute, Baldwin 1 as modified, Baldwin 2 as modified, Baldwin 3 as modified, Baldwin 4 as modified, Blackburn 1, Blackburn 2, Blackburn 3 as modified, Blackburn 5, Blackburn 6 as modified, Bud 4 as modified, Bud 7, Bud 10 is modified, Bud Blackburn 15, Bud 16 is modified, Bud 23 is modified, Bud 25 is modified, Cantwell Cruz 6 as modified, Cantwell 5 as modified, Capito 1 as modified, Cruz 8 as modified, Duckworth 4, Duckworth 5 as modified, Duckworth 8 as modified, Fisher 1, Fisher 2, Fisher Sullivan 3 as modified, Klobuchar 4 as modified, Klobuchar 5 as modified, Lujan 1 is modified, Lujan 2 is modified, Lujan 3 is modified, Lujan 5 is modified, Lummis 8 as modified, Markey 4 as modified, Markey 6 as modified, Markey 8, Markey 11, Markey 14, Markey 15 as modified, Markey 28, Moran 1, Moran 3 as modified, Moran 4, Peters Wicker 1 as modified, Peters 2 as modified, Peters 3 as modified by Warnock 1, Rosen 1 as modified, Rosen 2 as modified, Rosen 3, Rosen 4 as modified, Rosen 5, Schatz 1 as modified, Schatz 2, Schmidt 2, Cinema 1 as modified, Cinema 2 as modified, Sullivan 3, Sullivan 4, Sullivan 6, Sullivan 7, Sullivan 8, Sullivan 9, Sullivan 10, Sullivan 14, Thune Cinema Duckworth 1 as modified, Thune 2 as modified, Thune 3, Thune 4, Vance 2, Warnock 1, Warnock Lummis 2 as modified, Warnock 3 as modified, Warnock 4 as modified, Welch 1 as modified, Welch 2 as modified, Welch 5 as modified, Young 1, Young 2 as modified, Young 3, Young 5 as modified, Young 6, be favorably reported.
What happened to? Yeah, it was all those.
We need a second.
A second? Is there a second?
A second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Is there? Great. Next.
You have to say the motion's agreed to.
Motion is agreed to. I will turn to members for other amendments. Senator Blackburn?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I want to thank you, your staff, Senator Cruz and his staff, for the bipartisan work on this. You're right when you say it's been a process, but you can hear from the number of amendments that have been vetted and agreed to that it was a good, robust, inclusive process. I do want to call up my amendment, Blackburn 4. And this is a simple amendment, but it is one where we have not reached agreement, and I think a good discussion is in order on this. It would raise the mandatory pilot retirement age from 65 to 67, while ensuring that pilots maintain a first-class medical certification that must be renewed every 6 months. This amendment will help alleviate the pilot shortage that is crippling our nation's air travel while still prioritizing safety and experience. And I want to thank Senators Graham, Manchin, Kelly, and Ranking Member Cruz for their support of this legislation. It has truly been a bipartisan effort. Now, there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of noise around this, some of it accurate, some of it inaccurate. So let me just clear the air a little bit. What we need to know is raising the pilot age from 65 to 67 is safe. Here in the U.S., we have a decade of data, over a decade of data, to support raising the pilot retirement age. Since raising the age from 60 to 65, we have seen a safe period, one of the safest periods in aviation history, and that doesn't include data that is also available to us from the 9 countries that allow pilots to fly past the age of 65. They have proven that you can do this safely. There is exhaustive medical, acuity, skills testing, and that is the key to making certain that planes are safe. It is not the age of the pilot, and so this amendment preserves all of that testing. In these uncertain times, when there have been some accidents that are terrifying, we've discussed these. They give the public pause, but I think each of us would rather have an experienced pilot in the captain's seat than a younger, inexperienced pilot who maybe has not faced some of these situations. Now, what we do know is this: the pilot shortage is leading to a loss of air service across the country, especially in our regional and rural airports. We pulled stats from Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Montana, New Mexico, Nevada. The loss is significant, and the flying public is impacted. And it's also going to impact these pilots who have served for years. Many of the pilots who will be affected by our lack of action are here in the audience today. And I find it so interesting that we would agree that they should be fired because the union says, because of their age, we ought to be fired. And the union says, well, they're too old to be politically useful. So they're pegging it to an age, not to skills, not to acuity, not to results on a medical test. Now, part of the height of hypocrisy on this is the fact that private pilots and individuals can fly corporate and private after 65. They are taxiing on the same runways, they are flying the same airspace, and they're doing it without age limits. And I think Tennesseans ought to be able to have access to experienced pilots, just like so many of the corporate titans and the wealthy do with private planes. To my colleagues, your constituents are truly bearing the brunt of these pilot shortages, and you've got a chance to step up today and to support them. And Madam Chairman, I am committed to working with you, with this committee, to make certain that we address this. We know that our international organizations, ICAO and others, are not going to take an action until we do, because we have leadership in this space. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator Welsh.
Senator Blackburn, as always, makes a very compelling case, but there's a practical problem here. This will have real consequences on air travel. Raising the pilot retirement age will actually not get us more pilots in the air over the United States, because it will have significant impacts on our ability for our pilots to fly internationally. Currently, the ICAO has set an upper limit, age limit for pilots at 65. So bottom line, we've got to get ICAO to adjust that if we want to adjust it here. And talking about why that they should does not make it a fact that they will. If we raise the pilot retirement age, we'll be out of compliance, and pilots age 66 and 67 would not be able to fly routes that cross into international space. That's a big deal for everybody, because a lot of planes go over international space. But my airport, the Patrick Leahy International Airport in Burlington, is about 30 miles from Canada. Thank you, Patrick. And it literally means that there would be flights from Vermont that just wouldn't be able to be piloted by our pilots. So that's the practical challenge. Canadian officials have said that if the U.S. increases its pilot age, then pilots 65 or older would not be able to fly through Canadian airspace, which means the plane is grounded, a long-term delay. So this is trying to address a problem that we all accept is real. We need more pilots, but we don't have the ability to change what is the ICAO rule. And if we proceed with this, it's going to have very significant and detrimental impacts on travel. I yield back.
Senator Cruz and then Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I strongly support this amendment. I think this amendment is common sense and it is needed. Last year, this committee had a hearing about the severe shortage of qualified pilots and the barriers to entry for new pilots. I'm pleased that this bill will alleviate some of the pressures on the industry, including provisions to ease the transition of military aviation maintenance technician into civil careers. But one area where this bill falls short is fixing the structural problems associated with the lack of commercial pilots. Let's be clear, the commercial pilot shortage is very real, and it is felt most acutely in small communities that have lost regional air service. Right now, regional airlines have more than 300 grounded planes because there isn't a pilot to fly them. 310 airports across the country have lost more than a quarter of their flights. 39 of the 50 states have less service today than pre-pandemic. This is a serious problem that Congress needs to fix. This amendment seeks to provide a supply of experienced pilots to remain in the left seat. Raising the retirement age presents no additional safety risk to the pilot, the public, or the aircraft. Raising the retirement age from 65 to 67 to match Japan and Canada would be a modest improvement to help stabilize the workforce and improve air service. There is no valid safety argument against this change. Pilots would still be required to undergo the identical regular and thorough health exams. Moreover, the profession is already among the most regulated for safety. I will note the irony that some in the Democrat majority said we could not adjust the 1,500-hour rule because it was critical for safety to have the most experienced pilots to fly. And those very same senators are saying 67 and 66-year-old pilots are too experienced to fly and must be fired. Now, I understand labor union leadership opposes raising the retirement age. And they claim because it would be disruptive to implement and their membership doesn't support it. This is a weird union issue. It is strange when a union says, I like these members more than these members. That is an odd behavior for the leadership of a union. Madam Chair, I ask consent to enter into the record a letter from more than 50 current and former ALPA elected representatives that says that many pilots support raising the retirement age and that ALPA is not reflecting the stance of their members in their advocacy.
Without objection.
Here are two excerpts. Quote, ALPA's position to maintain age 65 is flawed and does not represent its entire membership. It is based solely on the earnings aspirations of younger and less experienced members who are eager to replace the highly experienced pilots forced to retire at age 65. Their motivation is driven exclusively by the industry's seniority system. Here's another quote. Quote, ALPA's position ignores the perspective of the highly experienced pilots who are qualified and capable of continuing to work until age 67. The letter goes on to say that ALPA is actively lobbying against its members. I would also ask consent to enter into the record a letter from 66 stakeholders across the country, including rural airports in Colorado, Georgia, Idaho, Illinois, Iowa, Louisiana, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Montana, New York, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Texas, Utah, Wisconsin, and Wyoming, and aviation organizations in Alaska, Iowa, Montana, New York, Nevada, and West Virginia, all in support of raising the retirement age.
Without objection.
I will note that on Monday night, ALPA President Jason Ambrosi was served with a lawsuit on behalf of experienced pilots who are healthy, trained, have the most number of flight hours, and are willing and eager to continue flying. The lawsuit alleges that ALPA has lied time and time again in its advocacy against raising the retirement age. Democrats on this committee will likely cite a letter from Administrator Whitaker sent earlier this week saying the FAA would like to study this issue before Congress raises the age. One, I think it was inappropriate for the FAA to wade into a policy debate, no doubt at the behest of Democrats. Administrator Whitaker sat at this table and promised this committee he would stay out of politics, and I think he has fallen short of that promise in sending that letter. Two, on Tuesday, Administrator Whitaker found himself before the House of Representatives and in hot water for breaking his promise when he was confirmed. And here's what Administrator Whitaker said about the FAA's position on raising the retirement age. Quote, "The official position is we don't have a position." I want to read that again because I suspect there may be members who want to characterize the FAA otherwise. Here's what the administrator said yesterday. Quote, "The official position is we don't have a position." I'll close with this. A mandatory retirement age at the age of 65 is ageist. It suggests that once a pilot turns from 64 years and 364 days to 65 years old, they are somehow no longer competent. That is why the AARP and hundreds of pilots have signed letters in support of raising the retirement age, which I also ask unanimous consent to enter into the record.
Without objection.
I'll note half of this committee, 13 members out of 27, would be forced into retirement today if this rule applied to Congress. The median age of the United States Senate is 65.3 years, meaning more than half of this body would be forced to retire. Now, the American people might well celebrate that development, but I am confident that extending such a policy to this body would not win a vote in Congress, even though more than 80% of the public supports term limits for members of Congress, and I have introduced a term limits constitutional amendment in Congress multiple times. I might suggest when we vote on this amendment that any senators over the age of 65 refrain from voting because they may not be capable of deciding the issue. I want to finally do one last thing. I want to note the men and women who are here, who are pilots who are sitting in the audience, and I want to briefly introduce them. These are pilots who are directly affected by the vote we are having. We have Scott Weaver from Maryland, a 20-year Air Force veteran, a lieutenant colonel retired, and an American Airlines 787 captain. We have Atiq Quamar from Virginia, a retired United 777 captain. We have Eric Smith from Colorado, a quality control line check airman and a captain of a 777 on United Airlines. We have David Schopel from Arizona and New York. We have Steve Schreiber from Maine. We have James Ray from North Carolina and South Carolina, a captain on American Airlines. We have Steve Trotta from Virginia, a captain on United Airlines who was forced into retirement last year. We have Chris Davies from Pennsylvania. We have Mark McCullough from Texas. We have Scott Avery from South Carolina, a Delta captain. We have John Shattuck from Colorado, a 787 captain with United. We have Pamela Rugger from Wisconsin, a captain of a 767 on United. We have Jim Samadi from Virginia. We have Brian Godlove from South Dakota, United captain of a 787. We have Dan Reeder from Pennsylvania, a Delta A330 captain. We have Scott Avery of South Carolina. We have Karen Knoll from Florida, a United Airlines 777 first officer. We have Michael Muscarello from Arizona, a 777 captain from United Airlines. We have Jay Govin from New Hampshire. We have Dave Woods from Colorado and Virginia, a Delta A330 captain. And we have Richard Mansky from Pennsylvania. If we could, I would like to ask those pilots and captains to please stand. And I would ask each of the members of this committee to look in the eyes of the men and women. We are about to vote on whether to fire them, whether to take away their jobs. I'll tell you, I am going to vote yes, that they can keep their jobs. And if you vote no, these are the people whose lives you're impacting.
Thank you. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to say that I disagree with the characterization of this issue as one of pilots having too much experience, as an issue of the pilots over the age of 65 being a safety risk. And I also disagree with the characterization that this is a partisan political issue. It is none of those things. What we're trying to do here is look at solving a couple of problems, one of which is the real pilot shortage that happened in this country. Part of it is because the commercial airlines paid to have pilots retire during COVID and bought off over 15,000 pilots. At the same time, they did not hire enough pilots, and they have amped up that process. I want to briefly explain why I oppose this amendment to raise the mandatory pilot age retirement. I agree with my good friend from Tennessee that we need more pilots, especially for regional carriers. That's where we need more pilots, is at the regionals. But it is not clear to me that raising the retirement age will fix that problem, and I fear that it will create others. So the two main things why I would oppose this amendment is, first, it will put our nation out of alignment with the International Civil Aviation Authority, ICAO. This is a treaty that governs international air travel, and it sets the pilot age at 65. So if we raise the pilot age to 67, those pilots can fly in the United States, but will not be able to fly into ICAO countries. So even if you have a country like Canada that allows pilots to fly over the age of 65 domestically, they still can't let American pilots into their airspace who are over 65 because it's in violation of the ICAO treaty. Similarly, in Japan, they allowed their pilots to fly well past 65. And again, it's the same problem. We have an international treaty problem. And if we want to fix that problem, then I would urge my colleagues to push our ambassador to ICAO to push for that change at the international set. So changing it doesn't do anything in terms of allowing our pilots to fly internationally. And then the second issue that we're trying to deal with, which I think is the bigger issue here, is we need more pilots to fly regional air carriers. Well, the issue we have there is that I don't think that we'll solve that problem with this amendment either. I mean, the notion that a huge number of pilots age 65 who have accumulated enough seniority to fly the highly sought-after international routes would suddenly, upon age 65, transition to flying domestic routes, much less regional routes, seem overly optimistic. Changing routes in many cases means changing equipment. These pilots that are older are flying wide-body jets on international routes. Do you think that they're going to suddenly be retrained and submit to flying small regional jets and even prop aircraft at the regional level? I think that's highly unlikely. I would also add that if we're going to take a step forward at this is not about safety of these pilots. I hope to fly well into my 70s and 80s. I mean, I'd love to be scaring my passengers for a long time to come. I'm nowhere near as experienced as you, and I flew much slower and lower than these wonderful pilots who are here. And we certainly have one of our former members, Senator Imhoff, who flew and continues to fly very safely. So this is not a safety issue. I just think that before we take a step as significant as this, I think we need more data on how do we get the international organizations and push those international organizations to raise their pilot age. I think that in the meantime, if we want more pilots, the better course of action is to ramp up efforts to grow and train more pilots, which our bill does. We quadruple the funding in the grant programs to create more pilots in this country. That's precisely what we are doing in this bill by dramatically increasing funding for the FAA's Aviation Workforce Development Grant Program. Raising the age from 65 to 67 gives us 2 more years of very senior pilots flying international routes. They're not coming into the regional. And it's not growing pilots who are going to be flying for decades more to come. It only grows pilots who can fly for another 2 years, and again, very limited in where they can fly. So I applaud the sentiment behind what we're trying to do here, which is to have more pilots flying, which we need, but I don't think this solves the problem that we have, and I strongly disagree with the characterization that this keeping the pilot age of 65 is being motivated by safety issues because we don't trust pilots, we don't think that more trained pilots are safe enough, that we think that this is an ageism issue or that this is a partisan political issue. This is about the mechanics of how do we get more pilots into regional jets, and the best way to do that is to train more pilots, not to extend the pilot age to 67. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. To wrap up on this, there's been much said about ICAO and the international standard. What we know is we have the leadership in this. If we make a change, they will make a change. We know this. And it is going to be incumbent upon us to be willing to buck the union and to make this change. Now, I had great conversations with a couple of airline CEOs in the last couple of weeks. I had a major airline CEO. They've got 16,000 pilots. They've got planes that are grounded and they can't get in the air because they don't have pilots. And I said, well, let's do this. It was successful when we went from 60 to 65. So it will be successful. He said, you know, it is the right issue, but this is the wrong time. I said, tell me when the right time is. See, when there are hard things to tackle, you want to keep kicking the can. Our nation has a pilot shortage. Our nation cannot hire enough. These airlines cannot hire enough quickly enough to train them enough to meet the hours to get them in the air. And it is very simple. If you are on that plane, you would rather have a seasoned pilot in that captain's chair if you run into turbulence. We're the leader. We take a move. ICAO will make the move behind us. Now, when it comes to saying we don't have data, we have data. We've got over a decade of data of 60 to 65. We've got data from other countries that have raised it to 67. So if you want to look at data on other countries for other things, but you're saying on this one issue, we're not going to take anybody's data, we've got to have a new set of data. I think that that is just another excuse not to take a vote that is going to be a vote that the pilots union does not want to see us take. We know that. The implementation, it's our responsibility to look over that. So, Madam Chairman, I would like to ask for a recorded vote.
We will have a recorded vote. Maybe we should just have that vote, and I'll enter my comments in the record after that. But I just want to say, you know, that this issue, our aviation system and safety needs our full attention of what's happened with the MAX crashes, what's happened with Alaska Airlines. So we need redundancy, and we need to make sure that we are measuring safety at every step of the way. That's why I'm proud of this underlying bill. I do think that a process of mitigating risk is critically important. And we haven't even processed all of the issues, I think, from the JATA reports and other issues on the oral alerts in the cockpit and the level of automation. Now, I know because you and I have had a great conversation about this, I think our disagreement is that I'm assuming everyone knows your age, but let's just say at at 71. You feel totally competent at everything, and at almost 66, I don't even feel competent on this sometimes. So I think the issue is that in our current system, 1/3 of pilots don't even make it to 65. We don't know exactly why. And our health and analysis of that, and the analysis that EASA and others have done on this issue, I think does point to a systematic approach. And the retroactivity here of doing this without that is something I am trying to do everything I can at this moment. I have 150,000 people in my state who work on aerospace. And I am for doing everything possible to have redundancy and analysis and to have a system that we all have confidence in. So I hope that we can get that done with this issue in the future, but today, with it being retroactive, I don't think so. So clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Klobuchar? Mr. Schatz? Mr. Markey? No. Mr. Peters? No. Ms. Baldwin? No. Ms. Duckworth? No. Mr. Tester? No. Ms. Sinema? No. Ms. Rosen? No. Mr. Lujan? No. Mr. Hickenlooper? No. Mr. Warnock?
No by proxy.
Mr. Welch? No. Mr. Cruz?
Aye.
Mr. Thune?
Aye.
Mr. Wicker? Aye. Mrs. Fisher?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Moran? Aye. Mr. Sullivan?
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Blackburn? Aye. Mr. Young?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Budd? Aye. Mr. Schmidt? Aye. Mr. Vance?
Aye by proxy.
Mrs. Capito? Aye. Ms. Lummis?
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Cantwell?
No.
The noes are 14, the yeses are 13.
The motion is not agreed to. Further discussion?
Madam Chair,
If
are you
not-
talking just generally on the bill, or?
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to call up Markey Amendment number 29. Markey Amendment number 29, which raises the wages and the benefits for airport service workers across the country. The past few years have been very difficult for everyone in the aviation industry, from pilots and flight attendants furloughed during the pandemic to the passengers affected by the Southwest Airlines meltdown. But throughout every setback, every disruption, every corporate failure, certain workers have been steady, predictable, and professional. Those are the airport service workers. Even at the height of COVID, they had to come in every day to make sure the airports were working. And over the past 2 years at this committee, I have repeatedly spoken about the important and unrecognized work that these workers, a largely Black, brown, and immigrant workforce, perform. Airport service workers are the heroes of the economy. Just as airplanes don't fly without pilots, our aviation system would collapse without airport service workers. Airport service workers are the baggage handlers who ensure that our luggage arrives at the right destination. Airport service workers are the food service workers who prepare our meals or a cup of coffee before boarding. The wheelchair attendants who help individuals with disabilities navigate crowded terminals. These workers, like service workers across the board, are often overworked and they are often underpaid. And we have a moral obligation to do right by these workers, to ensure that they are fairly compensated for their hard and grueling work. I know some of my colleagues on this committee are skeptical of this amendment. They think that the wages of this workforce should be left to the, quote, free market. So let me just address that directly. If you aren't swayed by the moral value of these workers, then vote for my amendment, because the low wages of this workforce are a market failure that put our aviation system at risk. Paying airport service workers a living wage and benefits makes our airports safer by lowering turnover and ensuring that airports have an experienced workforce. And this isn't some radical idea. The TSA administrator confirmed at a hearing before this committee that raising the wages of airport service workers allows airlines to be, quote, more selective as to who they hire. A study on the San Francisco International Airport confirmed this. When the airport raises its wages, turnover among airport service workers fell by 34%. And when the New York Port Authority raised the minimum wage for its airport service workers in 2019, it specifically cited airport security as the reason for the effort. The Port Authority said, quote, "The new policy will benefit the traveling public by reducing staff turnover and providing an experienced, well-trained, motivated workforce that can better assist in responding to an emergency, identifying security issues, operating equipment safety, and providing experienced customer service." So here's the truth. Airport service workers deserve a raise because they served on the front line of the pandemic, keeping our aviation system moving when the rest of the world shut down. They were working for low wages, taking the risk and contracting this disease for every other family. And they also deserve a raise, because all of us deserve to have a safe, quality air travel experience. When we refuse to pay airport service workers a living wage, we put ourselves and our constituents at risk. So my amendment, a revised version of the Good Jobs for Good Airports Act, would make our airports safer by requiring that airport service workers earn the wages and benefits of comparable workers in their local area. This amendment is not some one-size-fits-all approach, but adjusts for local conditions across the country. It won't apply New York wage standards to Kansas or to Wyoming. The standards will be comparable only to those local areas, not a national minimum wage, but something that adjusts those wages just up to what's going on in those communities where those airports are in those states. And it exempts all small airports, so that our amendment only applies to airports that have the greatest number of workers and face greater security risks. This is a pro-consumer, pro-security, pro-worker bill. It is win, win, win across the board, and it impacts not small airports, and it gives each individual area an ability to make that determination as to what a proper wage is in that area of the country. So this has been a long struggle over the last year in order to raise this issue. And obviously, workers, unions across the country have worked very hard to bring this issue front and center, to put a spotlight on these people who are the hidden figures in our aviation system. We know who the pilots are. We know who the flight attendants are. We can see them. These are the people we can't see. And these are the lowest paid. These are the most vulnerable. And these are the ones who took the greatest risks to protect all the rest of our families. So my hope was that we would be able to have this debate today and to make sure that we put them front and center, because we've dealt with everybody else. But I understand that the votes are not here today. And so I'm not going to ask for a roll call, Madam Chair. And I know that, we are going to, have a study of this issue. And I think that will be appreciated, that we'll get a study of the issue. But to a very large extent, this is something that we already know. We already feel, because we can see it at airports. We can see those people pushing the wheelchairs. We know who they are, and we know that they're vastly underpaid. So with that, Madam Chair, I ask for my amendment to be withdrawn, and we will come back at another time. But this issue is not going to go away.
Well, thank you, Senator Markey, and I thank you for your leadership on that, and I thank, the men and women who are here who represent the individuals across the United States who are working at our airports. Having seen this issue during the COVID debate and having what I would say a very robust discussion during the entire COVID aviation focal point about how to keep our aviation system going, which was critical during COVID, you could see that we didn't have the data and information that helps us put this over the top. I'm hopeful with this language included in the bill with the GAO today will give us that analysis of workforce. This is critical to have a robust and well-paid workforce in our aviation sector. We really, really need it across the board. The people who come and clean a plane need to have a decent wage and health care. But let's have this analysis, get the information, and move forward for the future. With that, is there any other discussion? Senator Cruz, do you have a motion?
Nope.
Not a motion, I have a statement, but I can wait.
A motion for final. Okay, so this is on the motion to proceed as not amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion is agreed to. The aviation FAA bill is moved out of committee. With that, now I'll turn to members who want to make comments. Senator Thune.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me just say, as a former chairman of this committee, I know how much work goes into this process. And I want to thank the chair and the ranking member and all of their staff for the hard work it took to bring us to the product that we reported today. This bill seeks to make additional improvements. It will address challenges with staffing and aging infrastructure in our nation's air traffic control system. I'm also pleased that the bill includes additional provisions to improve pilot training quality, which is a win for aviation safety and the safety of the traveling public. The bill also provides clear, new authorities and a comprehensive regulatory framework for beyond visual line-of-sight operations for drones, consistent with my increasing Competitiveness for American Drones Act, which Senator Warner and I introduced earlier this year. It includes several reforms to airline accessibility, including the Mobile Act, which I co-sponsored with Senator Duckworth. And finally, the bill bolsters rural air service programs and provides needed funding for airport infrastructure and small community air service development programs. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I look forward to working with you and the ranking member to getting this across the floor and enacted into law. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Thune. And when you say you know how challenging this is, I know you do. And now that Senator Cruz and I have been through it, we agree, very challenging. Further comments, Senator Peters.
I was gonna.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Klobuchar.
No, it's fine.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gary.
Well, I want to thank Chair Cantwell and Ranking Member Cruz for their bipartisan work on this bill. This bill is an essential step forward for U.S. aviation, for consumers, for our pilots and workforce, for our airports and manufacturers and more. I'm particularly grateful this bill includes provisions that I authored, including my Promoting Women in Aviation Act to strengthen our aviation workforce, my PFAS-free firefighting foam transition act, plus funding to help airports mitigate the effects of past PFAS use, my Unmanned Aerial Systems National Airspace Integration Act to promote innovation and safety, language ensuring that Michigan schools and aviation training programs have better access to grant funding, provisions I fought for to protect rural air service and essential air service airports, and an extension of an important authority needed to counter drones that may pose a risk to public safety. I am also proud of the provision in this bill that will strengthen our pilot and mechanic workforce as well as increase in funding for airport infrastructure, which is absolutely essential for Michigan airports to meet passenger needs. However, I will say that I am concerned, I am very concerned about an inclusion of a provision in this bill that will allow certain federal officers, including members of Congress, as well as their staff and families, to bypass TSA security checkpoints under certain circumstances. I think it sets a very dangerous precedent to exempt a class of people from security processors that are essential for our national security, not to mention it'll strain our already stretched TSA system. At the end of the day, I do not believe that members of Congress should get special treatment as prescribed in this provision. I look forward to working together to address my serious security concerns with the provision while championing all the good that this bill does through the conference process with leadership in this committee and our colleagues in the House. Madam Chair, again, thank you for your work. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Cantwell and Senator Cruz, for holding this important markup. Minnesota loves our air service and loves our airport, often voted the best in North America, I would note. And I want to thank all of the pilots that are here, the workers that are here, because that's why we have such good air service, as well as at our smaller airports as well. Aviation workforce, I want to thank my colleagues who worked with me on the bipartisan amendment, boosting the resources of the FAA 625 grant program, including Senator Moran and Senator Thune, Senator Duckworth, and others. Minnesota State University Mankato's aviation program to Lake Superior College's Center for Advanced Aviation in Duluth. These are schools that we need to replicate and expand. Aviation safety, thank you to Senator Cantwell for working with me to require the FAA to evaluate air traffic control staffing needs and develop a plan for full air traffic control staffing, and also including the amendments on runway safety and using state-of-the-art technology. Thank you very much, and I'll look forward to getting this bill down on the floor.
Senator.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I want to speak about two amendments that I'm going to be pursuing in the conference process. Since December 2001, the FAA has restricted flights within 3 miles and 3,000 feet of every Major League Baseball, NCAA Division I, and NFL football stadium during games and NASCAR during races. But the FAA does not issue NOTAMs for these events. ATC and electronic flight bag applications like ForeFlight must resort to using ESPN.com and commercial ticketing websites like Seatmaster or SeatGeek to find out the times for these sporting events. So if a pilot is flying near the stadium, there's no way for them to verify with air traffic control whether a flight restriction is in place. My amendment requires the FAA to issue notice to airmen for each event covered by these automatic TFRs. It also requires sports leagues to coordinate with the FAA on event schedules and delays, such as rainouts or extra innings. This amendment is supported by aviation groups as well as the major sports leagues. I look forward to working out the details as the bill moves forward. Now, another amendment addresses fees that are charged at taxpayer-supported public use airports. I've been hearing from pilots in my state and across the country that ramp fees at public use airports are growing more and more expensive. I've received testimonials from numerous pilots that have faced this problem. For instance, $285 charges for a 1-hour time of parking to have lunch at an airport cafe in Florida, or $400 to drop off a passenger to catch a taxi in Massachusetts, or $80 to park and use the FBO's bathrooms. Now, these airports are effectively closed to small planes unless the owner can afford to pay thousands in fees. My amendment number 13 aims to fix this problem and has the support of over 600 aviation organizations from across the country. I have a modified version of my original amendment, and I'm hopeful that we can find a solution to these fees at public use airports. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank you and Senator Cruz for your good hard work on this. I know it's been a tough battle, and I wanted to call your attention to my Capito 4 amendment, which I will offer, obviously, and withdraw. This is a small change that to the list of mountaintop airports. Mountaintop airport designation was created in 2018 in the FAA Reauthorization to give priority to mountaintop airport projects through AIP. If you've never flown into Charleston, West Virginia, you know what I mean. We have to pay a lot more for leveling, grading, and various other improvement projects. This preferred designation can make a big difference to these airport applications. My amendment would simply make sure that the list of mountaintop airports is kept up to date every 5 years. This mountaintop airport designation is completely removed in the House version of the bill, and the Senate version of the bill is silent on it. My concern is that we will end up in conference accepting the House language and that this important designation will be lost to our 947 airports across the country, 16 in my home state, 38 in your home state. Sorry, Senator Cruz, a little too flat down there. Alaska, 145, Montana, 61, New Mexico, 40, Colorado, 41, Arizona, 56, Wyoming, 32, and Tennessee has 28. So I withdraw this amendment, but I would like your assurance, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, that you work with me on this provision as the bill moves to conference.
As you can see, Senator Capito, even though Senator Cruz had a very long list of manager's modifications, there are still issues, and we look forward to working with you and others on this committee. I
appreciate that. Thank you.
On these issues. With that, I want to say staff has the authority to make technical and conforming changes to the reported bill. If there's no other business before the committee, we're adjourned.